Welcome to the Commercial Executive WoW panel. Building a brand means knowing your story and building and sharing that story, says Tamara McCleary, founder and CEO of Thulium Inc. Hi, I'm Taryn Grom, editor and co-founder of PharmaVOICE. And what a perfect lead into our last session of the day, featuring three of the big brand makers in the life sciences industry. I'd like to introduce Kate Cronin, Global CEO, Ogilvy Health, Jennifer Gottlieb, Global President, W2O, and Maria Tender, Head of Strategy at Syneos Health. Welcome, ladies. Before we dig into our conversation around the major trends in reaching key stakeholders, patients, caregivers, and physicians, how to influence change from a position of power, and bringing forward that next generation of women leaders, and of course, your wow moments that shaped your careers, I'm going to ask each of you to describe your leadership style in one or two words and tell me why you chose those descriptions. And because I like things in alpha order, Kate, I'm putting you on the hot seat first.
Well, thanks, Taryn, and thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with my friends and new friends, and I'm happy to chat today. So I would say this is a hard one because I usually don't describe my own leadership style. I have other people tell me what I'm doing and how it works. So I had to think about this one. I would say there's probably two words. In my organization at Ogilvy, I lead through influence because it's about the relationships that you have and the relationships that you make across the agency that helps you lead. So that's one. And the second is resilience, and being able to deal with the hard knocks. Where in the agency world, and there are a lot of hard knocks, there are a lot of wins, but there are also a series of hard knocks that you have to deal with, and COVID being one of them. So I would use those two words to describe my leadership style.
And I would say we need resilience more than ever today, right? Whether hard knocks or not, COVID has tested all of us in ways that we never anticipated.
This is true.
That's fantastic. Jen, I'll turn to you next. Jen, you're on mute.
I'm coming. All right. I was unmuted. Somebody unmuted me. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, two words is hard, to Kate's point. I think for me, purposeful couldn't have more meaning this year than it has in any other year, and we'll talk about that. And authenticity are the two that probably would describe my leadership style. Having been in healthcare, communications and marketing for 25 years and chosen that field, that really came with like a North Star for me in terms of the purpose of health and a love for science. And I always find myself in the chaos of everything we do, grounding myself, our clients, and other stakeholders in what is our core purpose, right? To make the world a healthier place, to help patients. And I find that to be always kind of my grounding force from a leadership standpoint when you have a lot of competing opinions or ideas. And then authenticity is probably the strongest one that describes my management and my leadership style. I always, I take a very real approach to everything. I believe life moves very quickly and we have a lot to do. And so there is no time to not just be direct and be candid, although kind. And being an authentic leader and bringing my authentic self to work has always proven to be just a great role model for others and also just a great way to lead the firm. So.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. I love that it's purposeful and authentic at the same time, and that your true north is really doing what's best for patients, because that's why everybody got into this industry, right? Because you all could be using your skills at PepsiCo or somewhere else, but you chose to impact the lives of patients around the world, which is a tremendous calling and a gift for all of us. Maria, I'll turn to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Taryn. You're going to see some consistency and theme here, I think. We have a lot in common. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with the second word first, if that's okay. And that word is motivator. You know, what I really look to do is positively challenge people to kind of look beyond the obvious, unleash and elevate the skill and the resident talent in each of them. Everyone on my team pretty much, right? So going back to the first adjective, it's humanistic. You know, Jen, you used the word kind. So a humanistic motivator. You know, I like to think that I have the ability and the instinct to really motivate with kindness. And, you know, I want my teams to have that same passion and human sensibility as they approach what they do. So, there's nothing wrong with marketing frozen dinners, but that's not what we do, right? So we do healthcare. So you need to have that passion and compassion as you approach the work that you do. So my words are a humanistic motivator.
Humanistic motivator. I love it.
Yeah.
I leave it to advertising execs to give me something that could be branded. That's fantastic. So let's talk about some of the things that you all are seeing in terms of trends in reaching the stakeholders, the key stakeholders for whom you all are doing work on behalf of: patients, caregivers, and physicians. Kate, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of omni-channel discussion, but let's talk about how the blending of those disciplines is really influencing what you do as an agency.
Yeah, so it's gone are the days where a client will come to us and say, we're looking for just an advertising campaign to reach certain audiences. We really look at taking an omni-channel approach at reaching those audiences, because we know that a patient, a doctor, whoever your target may be, you can reach them through multiple ways. And that really should have a surround sound approach. So you're not just doing an initiative through a vacuum or silo. So we look at how are you reaching them with your messaging through social media? Are you using, digital? What types of digital channels are you using to reach the audiences? And then that it's environmental also when they're driving to work. What are they seeing? And then obviously using new platforms that are coming out as well. I mean, I don't know about you ladies, but my children have taught me to do TikTok videos, and now health is getting into TikTok, as you know. And so that's a new channel as well. So as marketers, we need to stay on top of, what's a trend that is actually a trend that we should be on top of, and what are some of the fly-by-night things that maybe you don't need to engage with if it doesn't make sense strategically for your brand. And so taking a look holistically at all the platforms that are out there and the methods of reaching your audiences is really important. And so it's really about omni-channel versus even multi-channel.
Excellent. And do you see some of those trends being bubbled up from the grassroots? Like you said, TikTok, now that was being applied in other areas. And so now healthcare is making it applicable to its messaging. Yeah. So it's not just a top down, it's a bottom up now too.
It is. And also there's a new platform called Clubhouse. I don't know if you're on Clubhouse, but that's another channel where our health clients are getting involved with as well, which is basically audio chat rooms. And it's an excellent way to get health information across in an educational manner, using influencers to reach key audiences who are joining now Clubhouse. And those are sort of the bleeding edge people, because it's a relatively brand new platform. And I think now with post-COVID, the world has changed where everyone is about wellness and well-being. And all brands, not just health brands, are looking at wellness and well-being, and airlines are in that business and hotels are in that business. And so it's important that they need to reach their audiences about health and wellness messaging. What are they doing as a brand to ensure the safety of their consumers, their stakeholders? And so it's much broader now. So we're taking a look at all of that and the ecosystem that we live in now. And COVID has changed all of that in terms of how we approach health and wellness messages and where we're reaching our audiences.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kate. That's great. I hadn't heard of Clubhouse before, but then again, I'm not one of those people.
And the other thing I might add there is that, all of these platforms are really just a stage for influencers. They're just different, stages for influencers and information. So whether it's TikTok, TikTok, I think is, particularly in the derm space. I'm not sure why, but the derm space is like exploded. For TikTok. Maybe it's because of the visual nature of the issue, but it's just really interesting. You would never think that TikTok would be in healthcare. I never thought that would be the case, but all of a sudden it is. So it just shows nothing's out of reach.
Nothing is out of reach. Yeah, and we'll get back to that in a second, because it's all those things need to be in reach. And you've talked about that. All of these trends are great, but the communication still has to really move people, Maria. So
Yep.
How do you translate all of these, trendy things, TikToks, Clubhouses, into communications that still move patients to be adherent to their medications?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's starting to happen now is there is a bit of attention saturation, essentially, as healthcare is almost like embracing this omni-channel maturity. It's happening. Like we're all doing it now. And because we're all doing it now, what does that mean? That means that everyone is vying for the same attention space, right? Everybody is trying to capture that moment with that patient, with that physician. And if you think about this, there's all this digital activity, excessive screen time, Zoom fatigue. And what all of this is going to do is really act as almost like a great equalizer in terms of difficulty in capturing and holding attention, I think, across stakeholder types and demographic cohorts. So it's going to get even harder as more and more pharma companies embrace, omni-channel. We did a study actually that found that 30% of leading pharmaceutical companies have actually deployed sophisticated omni-channel marketing in at least one franchise. That is a big deal.
It's a big leap.
It's a big deal, and it's a big deal for pharma. And another 25% are piloting omni-channel approaches, just piloting them. So what that means is that everyone wants to be everywhere. And, again, content, what you put out there is going to be just as important as where you put it. I think the other thing that's happened is we can't forget the business that we're in, and we're really in the business of making sure that the craft is there and that what we are putting in front of people has that motivational ability to kind of help them, understand what it is that you're trying to move them on and how to do it. It's not just putting it out there, but putting the right stuff out there.
That's fabulous. And Marianne, that leads right into, Jen, one of your things is about the Uberization of healthcare. Talk about moving healthcare literally. So talk to me about your philosophy.
Sure. So we always talked about the Uberization of healthcare as a company. We're data and digital driven. And then, the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, the pharmaceutical and biopharma industry had to advance like 10 years of evolution in like a year. And I know, based on what Kate said, based on what Maria said, we're all feeling that. And we're moving rapidly with the change of the industry and of our clients and of the health ecosystem to ensure that we're marrying data and digital and tech-enabled marketing approaches to ensure that we can keep up. And I think, in a way, as terrible, and I say that in a heartfelt way, that the pandemic has been, and it really has been, there's going to be innovation that comes from this. And it's interesting because I've been able to kind of weave together my thinking about, the technology, the RNA technology that was put to the test and was a success in these vaccines was something nobody ever could have imagined. The speed at which the clinical trials happened for the vaccines is something nobody ever could have imagined. And then we have clients out there that are launching new drugs digitally with no humans and no sales reps. Again, something nobody ever thought possible. So we're starting to just see this trend. And the last thing I'll say is even physician to physician, in the heart of the pandemic, when things were at its worst in the spring, I'm sure you guys are aware, like the way doctors were communicating with each other were through social platforms. They formed their own Facebook communities across the world, sharing real-time information about what was working, what wasn't working, and experimenting in real time because they had to. And it's terrible that it took a pandemic to bring us here, but I do believe there's going to be so much advancement post this situation.
If I could just build on that, Jen, I would also say that, healthcare equity is something that we're seeing. So, when we look at clinical organizations, they're really actively working to build both, trust and awareness while making trials, more portable and flexible to help people participate from anywhere. So I think that's a big plus, in the pandemic. And the other thing is you look at commercial organizations and they're focusing on how almost like the social determinants of health are affecting outcomes and creating programs that are going to build the right environment for success. So, we're seeing a lot of this adaptation happen. I mean, the only other point I wanted to make was that, I think many people have been pointing to the coronavirus as the driver of change, and how all of our life science companies engage in with their valued stakeholders. But it wasn't the driver. It was really the accelerator, right? These fast shifts, our industry made were only possible because of the foundation that had already been built. And I know Jen and Kate would agree with that, because this is a foundation that's been being built over the last, I'd say, 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you on that. And I think, we're calling it forced digital because, health has always been a bit behind, and all that COVID did is sort of force it to move a little faster and expedite it. And so there are whole industries now, teledental health, telemental health. Like, these are things you never would have thought would exist, that you would have to see a dentist, right? And now we have teledental health. So I think the world has changed in a good way for health, because health needed to be expedited in this fashion, and it did. And it's forcing hospitals to be more digital in terms of how they deal with patients and EHR records and moving everything forward. And I think it's come a long way in a short time. So in that respect, I agree with both Jen and Maria. It's helped the industry in terms of moving it forward.
And as we become accelerated, who are we leaving behind? Because we're moving at a pace now that not everybody is used to. So is it the elderly population that just is not as connected, as digitally connected as younger generations? And how do we bridge that gap then?
I'd like to take that, actually. So as we were talking about earlier, I'm a caregiver of 2 elderly people who, the minute that the vaccine database opened up, right, to get an appointment, I'm sure you guys have heard all these stories. I compared it to trying to get concert tickets or get into a SoulCycle class. Like, you had to move at speed. You had to know what you were doing. It seemed virtually impossible and not user friendly for anybody of an elderly or aging population. And, I think the country has course corrected, but I think, to your point, Taryn, it made us all stop and think, we have to be more targeted and laser focused on our audiences, and taking a little bit more time and being a little bit more thoughtful about how people get information, and connecting those dots, I think, is going to be critical as we move towards more of a digital and telemedicine situation, because a lot of the people, the boomers, like, there's so many people that are, citizens of healthcare, like people that are out there, we can call them patients, citizens, consumers, that are not, they might have learned TikTok through their grandchildren, but they're not as digitally savvy. So we're going to have to meet them where they are.
Yes, they're not as digitally savvy. I can speak to that from experience. My own mother, she hasn't figured out how her Amazon Echo works yet, and she yells at it a lot. I'm like, stop yelling at the Echo. But
yeah, it's interesting, because I do think that there's studies that show that the elder population are embracing digital, and they actually go on apps. I went on vacation in South Carolina with my parents, who literally, I'd come downstairs and say, good morning, have a coffee, and they were both on their iPads and their phones, barely looking up at me, reading their newspapers, or my mom being on Facebook. And, I just don't think they're applying it to necessarily their health, which is completely understandable, but some are really engaging in digital platforms, but not necessarily engaging for health. And when you say, who's getting left behind, I do think there's a challenge with the older populations, but I also think there's a bigger challenge with people who are living in, health deserts, and who basically don't have Wi-Fi necessarily either. And so how are you reaching those patients who are hard to access and have difficulty getting the care that they need, whether they're living in health deserts or they just don't have access to all the technology that we talk about as if it's readily available?
It goes to Maria's point earlier about health equity. So you all work for large organizations that have a really important role to play in how we communicate then in terms of that disparity. And what are you all talking about internally? Because it's a big issue that COVID has revealed.
Yeah, so I'll start. So when we launched our diversity, equity, and inclusion practice this past year, off of everything that was happening, and we were doing work in DE&I, but we didn't have a standalone practice. We had a leader, but no practice. We actually developed an internal and an external practice. And the external practice is to do exactly what you're talking about. We hired somebody who, in our clinical trials group, who's solely focused on diversity in clinical trials, somebody who's solely focused on advocacy, diversity and advocacy in terms of communication. So we are actually like kind of turning what we do on its head to make sure that we are taking our learnings on the inside and putting them forth into the world. And we do believe there's a lot of work to be done, to Kate's point, to make sure that we are looking across different diverse audiences, both by geography as well as by race and sexual orientation, gender, age, disability, and making sure that everything is as targeted as we can be in speaking to them in the way they want to be spoken to.
And I think Jen raises really good points about like ensuring that our clients we're helping our clients navigate this. So we're constantly questioning, are these clinical trials set up, or is the marketing set up in a way that engages with audiences that really are affected at a higher rate? There's also an opportunity, I think, for the health sector to engage with the technology sector, perhaps, and offer unique solutions to reach these audiences. So whether it's hospitals and pharma working with, companies like Verizon or even Google to figure out how do we come together as different sectors to serve those who are challenged when it comes to getting adequate healthcare. And I don't think anyone has cracked that nut yet. I think there are conversations happening, but I think more can be done, and in combination with municipalities as well. So there's an opportunity there. There's an idea there.
Yeah, there is an idea there. I mean, I think the only other thing I'll add, because I think you ladies are spot on, is when you look at the fact that we are in a pandemic, it just makes everything like 10 times worse, right? And so, and I think that being in this situation is highlighted, I think, some of the disparity that does exist, even more so. You look at things like the ability to get a COVID vaccine, right? And how in certain neighborhoods, they have to limit the ability to get the vaccine to that zip code. Right. So I think that there's definitely things that are being done out there in the world to make it more equitable. But I think we just need to try harder. And when we come out of the pandemic, I think we need to amp it up even further.
I was going to say, after the pandemic, we can't forget about these lessons that we've learned during the pandemic, because it would be easy to turn the page. But there are some pages that maybe shouldn't be turned yet.
I would agree.
Yep,
100%.
Agree. And there's just also been just so many big things that have happened in the last year too, right? As agency leaders, I'm sure that every week there was another big thing, and it's like, okay, well, this is the next big thing, and then there's another big thing, and like, how do you keep it all straight? I mean, I guess that's my question to you, ladies. Like, how do you navigate these big things as they were coming in over the last few months?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've been tested. Yeah. I mean, it's like every turn, right? There was something else that happened most recently in Texas with the ice storm, and we have an office down there, and it was, it's like you just said to yourself, wow, like, are we going to catch a break this year? But I think it comes back to what Kate said about resilience. That really defines the year. I mean, I think it really defines the year. I think we've seen people do things. We talked earlier about like people taking care of aging parents or people taking care of children while working, things we never thought were possible, on top of many other bigger areas that we have had to, to tackle. And I think, Taryn, to your point, I gave a talk at our virtual Zoom holiday party at the end of last year. And what I said is, I hope that we all take some of the lessons from this year and that we come out the other side as better people and better human beings for what we have been through. It would be shameful if we don't. I know personally, I have a lot of things I'm taking forward, and I think a lot of people do. And I do think, and just back to our industry, I mean, and I heard them talk about it earlier today when we were talking about clinical trials on one of your panels earlier. We saw that we could expedite trials and get drugs to market and vaccines to market faster than ever. And we cannot lose the gem of what that is. And we have to push ourselves as an industry to see what's possible versus what's impossible.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what you're saying, Jen, about what we've learned about ourselves as leaders and also just as our organizations. And I think the key word is empathy and being more empathetic to each other. And also, we talk a lot about parents and being caregivers and then children and having to deal with that. But then there are folks who, I mentioned it during one of my town halls, that if you're alone and you miss coming into work because that was your social setting, call me, let's have a conversation. And this was before Zoom fatigue, I think, started setting in. And so I had a conversation with somebody. He said, I live alone. I live in New Jersey. I can't see my parents. I don't go into the office. I miss being with people and I miss the social setting. And so I think there's a loneliness issue as well with this entire situation. So Zoom doesn't make up for that, but I think we try to sense when someone is feeling down or lonely or whatever it may be within our organizations. And I think across the US, what you're seeing is an increase in depression and anxiety and mental health issues. And so we're seeing it in our organization. I think it's something that's just important for us as leaders to nod to and make sure we're doing everything we can to support our employees through telemental health services, which we have, meditation apps, all those things, but just as human beings calling in and checking and saying, how are you doing? Because there's a blending of the day. So you lose track of home life and work life. And then if you have nowhere to go and no one to see, it can be even harder. So I think Jen raised a good point with that.
Kate, also how are you doing? It's like, I think a lot of times we ask that question when we're in a forum like this with a few people, right? But I think everybody's situation is very different. And like you said, there are people that miss the office because they're missing missing human contact, right?
Right.
But reaching out to people who individually, one-on-one, and finding out what their situation is and how they're doing. Because I think everyone in these forums is going to say, yeah, everything's going great. It's fantastic. But in reality, it may not be, but they will only tell you that if you really ask.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And it goes back to that empathy that Kate just talked about. And I think that was a theme that we heard throughout the day as well, is that is a skill set that maybe had been undervalued. And now it is being far more tapped into by leaders. And it needs to, because, I hadn't really thought about that, Kate, but there is that loneliness factor. We focus on those other demographics, but truly, if you're alone and there's nowhere to go and no one to see, it can be isolating.
Yeah, your social life is work, and then it's taken away. So think about that, and then you're stuck at home alone, and it's hard.
Yes,
I think.
And holidays and weekends, right? So it's everything that you would normally deal with in life that now all of a sudden it's just you and the computer. It's rough.
We talked about the blending of the days, and here we are March 1st, and it feels like it was just Christmas time or Thanksgiving, and here we are already almost into the second quarter of the year, and the pages keep turning, and yet it feels like Groundhog's Day some days, doesn't it?
It does. Yes. It's my 1-year anniversary since I've been in the office on March 8th.
Wow.
1 year.
Mine's the 13th. That was the day I left. Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing.
And Maria, you started during the pandemic, so
I did. I started. I was at my former agency for 24 years, and I finally changed jobs, and I changed during the pandemic. And so I really don't know what the office is like. I don't know what. I don't know who sits where. Like I'm working with teams across, all the different offices, and I'm just like, oh, put that person with that person. And they're like, no, that's like a different office. Like you can't mix those people up. Yeah. But now we're mixing people up. We're taking people from different offices. We're creating these great teams, power teams, and it's working really, really well. So for me, I'm sort of thinking, well, once we get out of the pandemic, how do I bring all these people together if we're not on teams?
Yeah, it's breaking down the barriers of geography. It doesn't matter, right? Yeah, those P&Ls doesn't matter. It's like put the best people on the business regardless of where they sit.
Yeah.
And where they literally sit, right? So
that's right.
In the boardroom, it's all equal on Zoom. So
it's funny. We were always day one ready for this because we've always been a one long hallway company. Like we've been hiring people all over the country for a long time, but the thing that Maria brought up that I was just going to say is like, we've had a lot of new people start during the pandemic, and they are used to being in offices. And I'm so fascinated. It's like we could almost do our own clinical study on people that join companies during the pandemic, because it's a real test for all of you to like join a new place with people you've never even like met in person. You know, we are trying to give some extra care and help to those people here. Yeah.
So let's move into that a little bit. Let's talk about what are those tips that you can, share with other leaders who are on with us today about how you are onboarding folks who are joining during a pandemic. What are you doing, Jen? And then we'll go.
Yeah, I can give a few and then maybe turn over to Kate.
I can also tell you things
Maria can tell us from the other side.
I could say things not to do.
Yeah, that's good. For us, I think the first, we learned this kind of mid-pandemic. We started to really ask more questions about how people, like, are you a social person? Do you like to usually have human contact? Are you a tactile learner? And we tried to adapt some of the onboarding, for people that required that. We asked people right out of the gate, like, how comfortable are you in your Zoom box and your situation versus not? Because some people, I think you guys know, some people have adapted better. There are people I've talked to in clients as well as colleagues that are really happy, with this kind of teleworking. So we've tried to just match up the right people with the right structure. The other thing is we made sure everybody had excellent technology. We really invested. We actually opened like an Amazon store just for us, where you could go yourself and order things that you needed to make you kind of the best you could be. We had people do a lot more onboarding conversations, whereas you might join and meet 10 people. We maybe had people do Zooms with like 30 people. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it was trying to piece together a picture of the organization for these people, that they couldn't get in a regular meeting. And then, to be honest, it was kind of what Kate said. It's like, how are you doing? A lot more check-ins and a lot more adjusting and a bit more runway, to be honest, on the onboarding. Yeah.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, I would agree with all those ideas, and add the importance of two things. One is they actually, interestingly, see more people in many ways than they normally would, because we have a lot more Zoom calls, which I know we all have Zoom fatigue, but you kind of end up drinking from a fire hose because you're meeting all these folks that you haven't met, and you're not just sort of focused on your one team, because everything now is on Zoom. So you're seeing faces, you're putting faces to names, and that's happening a lot more quickly than perhaps it normally would have in the real world, real office situation. And I think that's important to note. But we are asking, how are you doing? What can we do for you? Assigning buddies, making sure, to Jen's point, kind of what do they need to be successful? And in fact, I have a boss who is I've never met in person. So the global CEO of Ogilvy is I've never met him, so but I see him on Zoom all the time. So
yeah, I mean, it's so funny, Kate, because I'm the new person, right? But I would be introducing people at the company that had been there for like 15 years. So here I was introducing everyone because you're just working with everyone. The only thing I would also add, and this is just something that we've been doing over the last year at Syneos and as part of our agency offering, is making sure that we have a very clearly defined vision. I think that, ensuring that what you stand for, what your purpose is, what your vision is very clear and well articulated to your employees is even more critical. Because I think when you're in the office, you just kind of like, live the vibe of the culture, and you live the vibe of the mission. But if you're not in the office, it's important for people to read and consume and feel what your mission is, so that they can be reminded of it. So that's the only thing I would add there. And maybe that's just because I started during the pandemic, and that was part of what I had to do, was develop a mission and vision. But I do think it helps, because it helps people to know what they're fighting for, even if they're fighting alone behind their screen in their homes.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point in terms of culture. And we do a lot of different things. Like we had, in the beginning, we had Zoom background competitions and things like that. It's just sort of like, how do you build culture in a virtual world? And how do you infuse that sense of camaraderie versus just getting on Zooms to have meetings and conversations and building it out a bit more of that. And so we've been doing a lot of that to make sure people feel connected with humans and having fun.
Yeah, that was actually the one thing I was going to add. We use Facebook Workplace. I don't know if you guys use that as our like communal platform and we have different areas. Like one is like strictly for information sharing. And then there's like one that we developed right into the pandemic for like fun, and we had one like your like four-legged friends, like for your pets. And I met so many people just actively being on Workplace over the pandemic, to Maria's point, based on common interests. There was one for families. So I think that there is a beautiful thing about the technology on those platforms in terms of feeling really engaged.
The other thing I just wanted to mention, we did have this initiative called Syneos Cares. And what we did was we invited everyone in the company to essentially donate an hour of their time a week for whatever their talent might be to help, for example, a mom who might need an hour to be on a call. Her kids could do some kitty yoga. They had meditation, they had kitty yoga, they had training your dog how to train your dog to go potty. I mean, they just had these really interesting talents. So we were able to really learn about everyone, and they were able to donate their time, which also freed up time for the employees to be able to focus on work. So it was a win-win. Really fun stuff.
And you all have the leg up on everybody because you deal in such creative atmospheres already. So you're really able to capitalize on that talent, as Maria said, that you already have in-house. I want to address some of the areas that you all also have a great impact on, and that's influencing change. You sit in incredible seats of power, and you have a really big mandate. And in terms of your operations, what advice do you have for women who want to get to that executive level? And it's especially hard now, as we talked about in our pre-call, with so many women opting out because they have competing demands on their time. So how do we, stop the bucket from leaking? And what is your advice to women? What are some of the things that got you where you are now? And whoever would like to start.
Yeah, I can kick it off here. I mean, I think, first of all, the whole incredible power. I don't know. It just feels weird for me to even say that, but
get over it. You have it.
But that's okay. I'll deal with that. But I kind of believe that we create and achieve positions of influence and power, in quotes, through our willingness really to take risks, innovate, lead, and create long-term value. And yes, it's by being strong, but it's about being human, which is, the women I think that we all are. So I can only say that I see the more we focus on how we can look to improve, disrupt, and kind of maximize our team's potential, not just individually, but also collectively, the more value and productivity I think that we can yield, for both business and our customers. So, it's really just about being the authentic you that you are, tapping into what it is, the gifts that you have to give the world, and realizing that you can't be good at everything, and knowing that everyone has flaws, no one's perfect, and that if you're a true leader, you're a constant learner. You're always looking for what's next, you're curious, and you have a little bit of humility. You're the first one to say, you know what, I don't know that, like, teach me that. And sometimes that teach me that comes from someone who's 20 years my junior. And that's okay, so I think humility is probably the best thing. I would, if I had to wrap it up in a word, I would say, that's, have a little humility. And I think that will go a long way.
I would agree with you, Maria. That's, I would say I like what you said about leaning into what you're good at, because you're not everyone's going to be good at everything. So it's sort of like, know what you're good at and celebrate it and keep doing more of it. And then also agree with you being curious. So I always say it's good to be curious because you learn, and it's also good to be uncomfortable because you learn. So if you're uncomfortable, it probably means you're learning and you're growing. If you're complacent, it probably means you need to get uncomfortable. And it's okay. And it's okay to fail. There's a sphere of failure, right? But it's okay because that's where, and not to sound cliche, you do learn from those failures. Like I have vivid memories of when there's been missteps in my career, and I remember I'll never do that again. And that's as strong a learning as when you've had a success, if not stronger. So get uncomfortable, be curious. Those are things that'll help you grow.
I love that. Yeah, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's perfect. Jen?
Sure, it's funny. Lots of similarities. I think too that have come up already is being human, having humility. I think that people really embrace that. That comes back to being an authentic leader. The other thing that I think is so important is being very knowledgeable about what you know. And growing up in the business, I remember somebody once saying to me, you know more about your craft than any client you're actually probably going to come into. So bring that, always have the confidence to know that, and have the confidence to know that you know more than you think you know. And interestingly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg came up, I don't know if it was earlier in our talk or one of the other talks, and I watched the documentary with my 18-year-old daughter. And I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it talks about her success was very much built on her intense lifelong learning for knowledge and becoming such an expert in what she did. And I always anchor us in that as a company, be amazing at what you are here to do, be ultra knowledgeable about that. And then the other two things is, strong work ethic. I think that long gone are the days of the careerists, right? It's like get in your job, A+ or nothing, do an amazing job and have real impact that you can measure, and you will rise. And then the last piece of that, and I speak to this out of experience, although we are in the communications business, I was never great at doing my own PR and or communications for myself. And I would say, my work speaks for itself. If your work isn't speaking for itself, then you need to speak for it and not be afraid to take credit and ownership in the right way of all of your successes, and go with your gut and speak your mind. Yeah.
I think that's all great advice. And so how do we keep women from, how do your organization stop women from opting out? And that's a tough ask, because you have a lot of employees to keep track of. But we can't lose a whole generation of women to COVID. So what do you all do?
I say one word. Mine just gets wrapped up in one word: flexibility.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the key word, flexibility.
And we actually started a program, we call it the FIT program, and it was during COVID, and I do intend to keep it. It was about flexible work hours based on the pandemic, and people could come to us and say, given my situation, here's what works for me in the week, and work it out with their teams and even their clients in some instances. And I do think flexibility and really challenging ourselves to what that means, right? It's no longer what it used to mean. It's what does it mean now? And having it be tailored and unique to each person. I think is really important. And then the other thing, I have one beautiful story. We have these employee resource or business resource groups of different people through our DE&I work. And one of them is a working parents group. And a woman was going to resign because it was untenable during the pandemic where, she couldn't do both with the small children. And one of the other moms in the group came to her and said, let's go to management and see what we can do. And they came together. She had a kind of a mentor advocate, and came and made a couple of suggestions, and we were able to repurpose the role. We were able to figure out a new role. And that just happened the last couple of months. And, but sometimes it takes all of our ambassadors out there in large companies to identify when that's happening and speak up and solution for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I that story is just so great, because it's it's okay to be not okay. Right. But give it a shot. Let yourself be heard. There are ways around it. And I love what you did. I think that's fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think flexibility is going to be the key, as we said, because as we go forward, it's not going to be the same way it was 18 months ago. It's going to be whatever that next thing is. And so we're going to be looking at hybrid work times and workspaces and all of that. We talked earlier about, in Manhattan, do you push a button to go up to to the 42nd floor? Maria, you said that would take 3 hours to get everybody up there. So how do you kind of work through all of this? Because it's going to be challenging to get everybody back at work, and it's going to be based on personal preference, right? You talked about surveys. Are people comfortable coming back to work? Do they not want to come back to work? So it's a big issue that you all are going to have to manage going forward.
Yeah, I don't think we did a survey, and we don't think. I mean, we don't need everyone to come back. A lot of people moved out of the tri-state area in New York. Actually, they've moved to Illinois or California or Connecticut or not really commutable, and that's okay. And we don't expect them to come back once our office opens up, because I think the challenge is going to be when you have half of the people, maybe 40% of talent coming into the office and 60% not coming in, and having those meetings where you're brainstorming and how do you engage the folks who are not coming into the office in a way where you have people around the table brainstorming and putting things up on a board. And that's where you kind of need the technology to actually help, and a big screen where the folks who aren't there can see what's happening in the room and can engage in a way, because I think we all have to invest in that kind of technology to ensure that it's not about necessarily being in the room per se, but making the folks who aren't in the room be able to engage in an effective way for those kinds of group meetings. Because I think that I'm okay with people not coming back, not everyone coming back, but it's just got to be workable in terms of the hybrid approach that we're looking at going forward.
And in that hybrid approach, but you work in such demanding areas too, because you are at the mercy of your clients. Let's face it.
Correct.
They want something, and you are in service companies that you deliver on those promises. And how does that, then are your clients more understanding? Do they get it because they're also going through their own internal issues?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Maria. Go.
we had a client that recently told us, they said they've decided to stay virtual, and they're going to use the office for a collaboration and a bit of culture when it's necessary. So I think a lot of our clients are starting to realize that there are benefits to this, and they're using the office for like special moments. So I think it's whatever works for the company. I just think about, pre-pandemic, whenever there was a mom that was working from home and she was on the phone, it's like she was the oddball out, right? And she'd be like, are they going to call me now? Are they going to call me? And, we would dial her in. But now it's like you said, Kate, it's almost like there has to be some technology that brings us all together in a room, because this isn't going to work if there's 40, 60 in and out. There has to be a better way. And you do have to come together and collaborate. And you have to respect the fact that some people will be at home.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. This has been such a great conversation, and there's been so many great tips and insights and how you all are managing through all of this. And so I'm so very appreciative of all of that, as is our audience. Before we go into the Q&A, though, I would like to get your wow moment, since I've been saying it every session. This is our Woman of the Week virtual panel. So, Kate, I'm going to start with you. What is the wow moment that either changed the trajectory of your career, or has created a continuing influence for you?
I would say that it was when I was much younger, because I always reflect back on it, and I was dealing with the C-suite of a client and had to basically help them through an FDA advisory panel hearing, and didn't realize at the time that was a pretty pivotal moment, that I was literally guiding the CEO and the chairman of a major pharmaceutical company. And at the time, I think I was an account supervisor or something. And it was just me and them, and working arm in arm and rolling my sleeves up. And at the panel hearing, when the drug was recommended for approval, I remember my boss turned to me and said, the client turned to my boss and said, she deserves a promotion for this. So it was sort of a funny moment, but I remember thinking it's because I just knew what I had to do, and I didn't have any fear around hierarchy, and just delivered. And so I've always kept that in the back of my mind, that it's just being fearless and being confident and comfortable in what you know.
I love that fearless part. And what a great opportunity. And that's fabulous. Jen?
Yeah, so Taryn's asked me this question before, and it's always joining W2O. So I wanted to spin it up a
I
little.
know she switched it up on me.
I mean, it's been 15 years, and I think both of you, Maria may not know, but Kate knows. I mean, started this place with like 30 people, 6 in New York, and it's been kind of like a rocket ship in a great way. So that was my career-defining, game-changing wow moment. But I actually thought to myself, we all have so many of those moments, though, that make us who we are today, very similar to Kate's. And I thought a fun one today would just be to tell you that as the pandemic, kicked into gear and we started seeing all of these scientific leaders and major infectious disease physicians on the news, I started to collect in my head how many of them I had worked with, media trained, media coached, and like written their messaging for, because I spent most of my career in infectious disease and vaccines.
I love that.
And whether it was Moncef Slaoui, who ran Operation Warp Speed, Dr. Peter Hotez of Baylor, Dr. Besser at Robert Wood Johnson, or Dr. Schaffner at Vanderbilt, all of who have been on the news every week. I media trained every one of those doctors way back in the day. I think I might have been the first person to ever do that with most of them. And I kept bragging about it at work because I kept saying, kind of to Kate's point, the things I did as an account supervisor are coming full circle to today. You don't lose your experiences. Like 25 years in, every one of those moments mattered. And that's what I try to teach everybody every day. Everything you're doing today, no matter how small or large it seems, will end up being like the Kate and Jen moments of, 25, 30 years into our career. And I'm so proud, to have influenced all of these people, so it was really fun to watch. Yeah.
I love your new wow moment. I think that's fantastic. Thank you. That was great. Maria?
It just inspired a wow moment in me when you said full circle. I'll just tell you a cute little story. When I first started at my last agency, which was, in the 90s, I started out working on Hershey. So, the Hershey candy, all the Hershey candy. And by the time I left the agency, I was working on diabetes 25 years later. So that was kind of a wow moment where you're like, I don't know, did I cause this? And now I'm trying to treat it. But my real wow moment was, working on Keytruda and realizing, I think, as I worked on that brand, how important it was to get the communication just right. We were talking to people who were facing stage 4 cancer. How do you market to someone that has stage 4 cancer? And we realized that you don't. What you do is you provide them information, you provide them with hope, and you give them what it is that they need to kind of keep their hope alive. So it was kind of a moment for me to say, am I marketing? Is that what I'm doing? Or am I really advocating and helping people so that they can find the path to the right information and get the right medication that they need? So it was a little bit of a moment where, like, if somebody's facing stage 4 cancer, you don't want to market to them. Like, there's something like wrong with that. But what is it that you do? So you have to do the right thing, essentially.
I loved all of those wow moments. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And we do have a few minutes now for Q&A if you are all up for it. And we have a robust Q&A panel here. So one of the questions is, how do you set expectations as far as what hours availability you expect with your teams? So that's a tough one too. As much flexibility as you want to give, you also have to manage those deliverables. So how do you balance that?
So I can comment on that. We actually recommended to our teams to put something on their signature, on their email. My regular working hours are X, Y, or Z, and, I can be reached regularly during that time. And in other hours, I may be slower to respond. We actually went as far as to have people define that, because you're not in an office, so people don't know what time zone. People don't know if somebody's in London or in California, also based on a lot of new people joining. So that was one of the things we did.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, that is. And also blocking your calendar, just sort of block your calendar at dinner time, just sort of, if dinner time is your thing and we're going to get your kids ready for dinner, just every night, just block it and ensure you don't accept meetings at that time either. So.
Good. That's another great tip. Another question that came in, and it was directed to you, Kate. Many of us have struggled with how to brainstorm, whiteboard new ideas in this virtual plus in-office situation. Maybe we turn this upside down and the center of the conversation is online and the face-to-face group integrates with them. Maybe there's a solution that actually becomes more tenable. So that goes back to the earlier conversation about how you bring everybody in a room when not everybody is in a room.
Yeah. So and that I think is a great approach, is that you center it online. You use technology like Miro, and you have a giant screen, and the people in the conference room are using Miro to do the brainstorming with other folks from around the country or wherever you're inviting them to participate. And so you kind of, if you're going to have people online and offline, you use Miro, or I keep using that because that's the one that I was just using yesterday, but a platform that actually allows people to engage versus a whiteboard in the room where it's very hard for people to see that. So I love that idea.
Fantastic.
I've actually found that the brainstormings that we've been doing online, that was the thing that I feared the most, was two things. How do we brainstorm online? But now everything is, there's terrific ways of getting it done. And I feel like we've been more productive, and we have even stronger ideas coming out of our ideation sessions. It's more organized too. There's just something about it, and more participation. And it is a bit of organized chaos, but it's very focused and centered on what the task is. So
yeah, it's good for the people who are, Maria, I just want to add, I didn't think of it until you mentioned it. It's good for the quiet people who don't like to speak up in the brainstorm. It actually works beautifully because they can engage just as much as everyone else when they're using like the stickies and stuff.
Yep. And you could you could write things on the little stickies and put them up, and it's great. The hardest thing I find though is if you have to work on a deck, and I love the room, the wall, and being able to move things around. So
I miss that. I love it too.
On every call, I'm like, could you put up slide sorter?
Yes.
Me too. Every day.
You all are very funny. It's the things that you have in common. That's great. Another question is, what about a global perspective? How has this changed what you all do? Because
I love it.
You're more global than ever.
I feel like you don't have to get on a plane anymore. There's two things. I love it because I'm seeing more of my global colleagues now more than ever. I don't like the fact that I'm also seeing them at 10 o'clock at night or 6 a.m. in the morning, but you don't have to travel. It doesn't take you away from your family, and you have exposure to everyone across the world in an easier way. We're all used to using technology. And so I feel like I'm more of a global citizen in a way than I was before. So it works for me.
I agree with Kate. I feel closer to our global colleagues than I ever have before. And the video conferencing, the other thing is that we don't really use the phone anymore. That's what's so weird. We haven't talked about that. Like, it used to be like video conferencing was a little bit like, oh, maybe I'll do that someday. And we would just call people. How weird would it be to just have a call? And so it's like with our global colleagues, I feel like I've been in Europe on a regular basis. It's been fun and great. Yeah.
That's good. Maria, what about you? Global?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone else, I think I've been in a position where I've been able to meet so many people over the course of, the months that I've been there, more than I think I would have ever had a chance to meet if travel was involved. Mm-hmm. Not to mention jet lag. So, I agree. I just think that piece of it, is, but I do think that there will be a need at some point, to have those interactions, but maybe they don't need to be as frequent as they used to, or you don't have to come out, to Europe for a meeting, for every single meeting. You can be more productive this way. So I think there's a lot of upsides to what's been happening too. I mean, if you cut out like an hour and a half of commute time, which is what I have, that allows you a lot of time to focus on the work, so there's that piece of it too that I think helps.
Ladies, we're at the end of our time, and I could go for another hour, but I cannot because we have to go into our lounges. But you really have shown us what women of influence who are resilient, who are purposeful, who are humanistic, and who are motivators can really do and how they can change the life sciences industry. So I can't thank you enough for being part of our WoW virtual panel and our WoW virtual event today. Your insights have been terrific, and I am deeply grateful to all of you. I also want to thank our attendees who have been with us during the day, our other WoW podcast attendees who have been in and out throughout the afternoon and morning, and to our sponsors, BioForum, Greenfire, Karyopharm Therapeutics, W2O, and WCG. And I would be amiss if I didn't do a huge, huge thank you and shout out to our event partner, Momentum Events, for their expert guidance and getting me through this process seamlessly. So it's been a joy to work with them, and it's been a joy to be with all of you today. Before I ask everybody to jump off and join us in the lounge, because I'd love to continue on the conversation, I'll leave you with a parting note from Meg Whitman, who is the former president and CEO of HP. Do what you love and success will follow. Passion is the fuel behind a successful career. And I think you have all shown us today what a successful career looks like when it is driven by passion. So thank you all so much for being part of our WoW event. And thank you to all in the audience for being with us for the day. And don't forget, come back at 4:30 after the lounge for our virtual happy hour. You'll have to go out and come back in through a Zoom link. I had specific instructions about that. Hold on, which you can join by clicking the join button on the agenda session in the other place that we're supposed to go. And that'll bring you into the Zoom lounge. I knew I was going to screw that up, where we have some great trivia, some prizes, and we'll have some laughs. So go pour yourself a glass of wine, or I'm going to go get my margarita. And thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Taryn.
Great.
Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you in a bit. Bye-bye.